The Center for Science and Culture goes back to December 1993. An article appeared in the Wall Street Journal, written by a young philosopher of science named Steve Meyer, that focused on the plight of a biology professor at San Francisco State University named Dean Kenyon. He was a tenured biologist, very well regarded in his field, but what happened is that he started to believe that there was evidence of intelligent design, and so he was basically persecuted. They took away his introductory biology classes, and it went all the way up to the faculty senate. And in defense of him, Steve Meyer wrote this article that was published in the Wall Street Journal. And I was working for Discovery Institute at the time, and President Bruce Chapman, who was a very dedicated reader of the Wall Street Journal, basically clipped the story, put it on my desk, and said, "This is interesting. We ought to meet Steve Meyer." And when I read it, I agreed. And so we invited Steve Meyer out the following summer for a summer program that we did. And during that summer program, Steve gave a lecture that really was sort of the kernel of what became his book, Signature in the Cell, where he talked about how in the 19th century materialist view, everything was down to blind matter and motion, but what the cutting edge of modern science was showing was that you go to the very heart of matter. At that time, the idea was that that was DNA, and you find screaming evidence that just screamed at you of design and purpose. And I was a social scientist. My background was political science, and in fact was a professor at Seattle Pacific University at the time. And when I heard this, it was really mind-blowing, because in my discipline, everything really was based on the materialist mindset, that everything was blind matter and motion, and that explained politics, that really deconstructed personal responsibility. They really adopted in political science all the presuppositions, if you will, of 19th century reductionist biology and physics. But on the basis of that's what science showed. But here, Steve Meyer was basically saying that the best of the modern science was turning that on its head. And I thought, if that's true, then all these disciplines from the social sciences and even in the humanities that had basically been rebuilt and I'd say sort of destroyed during the 20th century based on this 19th century reductionistic scientistic framework needed to be reevaluated. Because if the science itself was now showing that materialistic reductionism was not true, then that had huge repercussions. And so out of when I thought that, Steve and I began to have discussions, and he talked about how there was really a need for a place where this new generation of scientists at the time, people in graduate school, just getting out of graduate school, who basically saw that science was pointing away from materialism, there was a need to have an organization that could be an organizational home for them, to support them, to encourage their work, to get their work out to other people. And it was out of those discussions between Steve and myself that we came up with the idea for the Center for Science and Culture. And it's been a really terrific ride since then. And so we had those discussions over the next couple of years, and then by 1996, we got the kernel of the funding. And so in August 1996, we held a conference at Seattle Pacific University where, as part of the conference, we unveiled for the first time the Center for Science and Culture. And on that very week, a book came out by one of our new senior fellows, who's still a senior fellow of ours, named biochemist Michael Behe. It was called Darwin's Black Box. And so talk about beginning a program with a bang. Behe was actually at this conference in 1996, and things really went from there. And we basically haven't looked back since, and we created lots of controversy, but I say helpful, good controversy, raising fundamental questions. And so when I think of the Center for Science and Culture, we are really dedicated to the idea that ideas matter, and that how we think matters, and that ideas have consequences, both for good and for bad. And I'd like to say that if you look at Darwinian evolution, it has had huge consequences for how we view ourselves, for beliefs about human dignity or lack thereof, for applying things like survival of the fittest to social policy. It has been tremendously dehumanizing in many aspects and played into the crusade for eugenics to breed a master race. It has built into arguments about moral relativism, the ideas that morality evolves based on the dictates needed for survival over time. It has certainly played into arguments over whether God exists or not, because in Darwin's view, he basically thought he had an explanation that made God superfluous. And so you have many biologists today, from Richard Dawkins to Jerry Coyne at the University of Chicago, who think that Darwinian evolution provides a very powerful argument refuting the existence of God, and many people using Darwinism to basically say that science and faith oppose each other. And the good news about intelligent design is that, in fact, the evidence from physics, from cosmology, from biology, from all the various subdisciplines of biology, from mathematics, from computer science, are really pointing in the opposite direction. That, in fact, the purpose that we see just on a common sense level can be substantiated with rigorous mathematical arguments, with the actual empirical data from biology, the empirical data from physics, that is pointing to a universe of purpose, a universe where we are meaningful because we're produced by a process that actually did have us in view and that did really point to us, and that we were in its mind, and we were in the mind of the process that created us. And so I think this gives us hope. And so I think the message of intelligent design is really a great message of hope, that the natural sciences, which tell us so much about the wonder of nature, also end up corroborating our common sense view that human beings are significant, and that good and evil is significant, and that there's a purpose for our life, and that that's not just a fairy tale, and that science and faith and ethics and humanity actually go together. They reinforce one another. They're not anti each other. And that is something that I think people need to hear. People need to hear even more now than when we started. But it's been really exciting to see just how many minds have been opened in the 20 years that we've been in existence. And whether it be articles in the major media from the New York Times or the major media networks or online, or just discussions with students in our summer program. Every year we hold a summer program where we bring students, largely graduate students in the sciences from around the world, and they are hungering for something more than just the blind materialistic view of science. And they are seeing that there is something more, they're hungering for it, and then when they get and to hear our arguments and get to delve deeper and to see that there are other people, in many cases from other countries, that are also pursuing the same idea, this inspires them with hope. And so I think what we're going to see over the next coming generation is this whole thing is going to break wide open, because there are so many people now who are saying that the emperor has no clothes, even in the evolutionary community, and they're desperately seeking for some other materialistic alternative. I think we are in a really important moment to be able to make the case for intelligent design and be listened to.